Welcome to the Invested Teacher Podcast with Kyle Pierce, Matt Bigley, and John Orr.
Get ready to be taught as we share our successes and failures encountered during our real-life lessons, learning how to build generational wealth from the ground up.
Welcome, invested students, to another episode of the Invested Teacher Podcast. Today, sadly, Matt was called into, he called me this morning and said he feels like he's back in the education space, going to do some professional development or professional learning, as we often do in that space. But he's doing it on the realtor side of things. So there's some new rules, new regulations going in. I'm sure anyone in the real estate industry here in Ontario are aware that there are some changes that have been put into effect. Some people are excited about, some they are not, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We are actually going to be diving in to the idea of buy-sell agreements when it comes to our businesses. When we have partners, specifically, this typically happens when we have some sort of privately held corporation where there is more than one shareholder.
Yeah. And I think this is a really important topic, because if you do have a corporation where you have more than one shareholder and you've not thought about a buy-sell agreement, or if you're like not sure about how solid your buy-sell agreement is, in this episode, we want to talk about, common mistakes in buy-sell agreements and how to strengthen them up. So, if you were actively involved in your buy-sell agreement, and you probably should have been, especially as a shareholder in a private corporation, then you are going to want to listen up. You're going to want to go like, wait a minute, did I think of that? Did I include that? Did my lawyer think of that? And did my lawyer include that? So, we're not lawyers, but we have gone through this process. We consult with people regularly about their corporation structure to minimize their taxes. And this often comes up because it's like, wait a minute, like if we're going to go down that route for corporate tax savings, we do want to talk about what's happening with your buy-sell agreement so that we can plan accordingly. So we've got some strategies. We got some common mistakes that people, or corporations have put in their buy-sell agreements. We want to talk about them so that you don't have these same mistakes and you're solid and you're ready to go.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. And just to kind of reiterate, every time we get on a call and we are chatting with business owners, particularly business owners that own shares in their business, in a corporation, and there's more than one shareholder, we actually, like a lot of times, our focus sort of pauses. Like the initial call was not intended to talk about buy-sell agreements, but it's a question that we always ask, because it's something that is like easy is maybe the wrong word for it, but it's something that you can do relatively quickly, is to review your buy-sell agreement or to ensure one exists. So the first thing we do is ask, do you have one? And for a good chunk of the business owners that we chat with, they have more than one partner, even if it's a spouse. So this is for people who are like, well, I don't really need one because it's just like I own half of the shares of the corp, and my wife owns, or my partner owns 50%, the other 50% of the shares in the corp. So we don't really need one. Well, in reality, you actually want one. You want to have it super clear. We're going to talk about some of the things you want to have. So you do want to have one. And then for those who do have one, we always ask them and we say, so what's in it? And for most business owners, they're sort of like, I know we put one in there when we open the corporation, but you can imagine how there's so many other details happening at the time, right? You're like going through the articles and you're all of these pieces, like what kind of shares should they be? Pref shares, common shares, like all those things are happening. And then the buy sell is something that oftentimes sort of gets slipped in. And as my senior partner on Corporate Advisors, Gord, he always says, it's like the lawyer, and he's not picking on lawyers, just, lawyers like have this template, and he's like, they go to the bottom drawer and they pull it out and they dust it off, and then they kind of like place it on the table. And then you as the business owner are kind of looking at it and they explain it in very, very high level summary. And then you as a business owner go, I guess it's good because like I actually don't know what else it should have.
You're the professional here.
Exactly. So then, and then it gets filed away. And again, not picking on any professionals out there, but if you don't go down a very, very clear set of questions and really start thinking about the different possibilities that could happen, we're not saying that we want them to happen. It's like anything when you're trying to protect yourself. You're trying to protect yourself from the scenario that you don't want to happen. So, John, you and I, when we had put together our corporation, our active corporation, you and I sat down, and I remember us kind of engaging in the same process. We just sort of went, yeah, okay, sounds good. Like, is this what we do? And, the answer was, yes, you should have a buy sell. Okay, let's do that. We put it in, never really paid any attention to it initially. But the problem comes when something actually happens beyond your control. Now, at the time when you're starting a partnership, in your mind, you're like, well, of course, we're not going to ever get in a fight. We're never going to want to, leave the corporation or leave this partnership, because you're at the beginning of the journey. If you're already feeling that way, you wouldn't be at the tables. But the reality is it could happen. And let's be honest, there's other scenarios that could happen as well. And when they do happen is not when you want to be trying to figure out how it's going to look and sound, because that's when legal fees come in and delays and fights. And I thought this, and oh, I didn't know you were thinking that. You want to make sure that it is taken care of in this agreement, so that if by chance, we hope it doesn't, but if by chance it is ever necessary, that there is no lack of clarity, and that things happen in a way where you know exactly what's going to happen, because we already discussed this well in advance.
And I think if you don't have a buy sell agreement and you're like, wait a minute, I don't have one, and I'm not sure exactly what that is. I think Kyle, you've pretty much outlined really what that is in that last kind of statement that you made, is thinking about, it's almost like a prenuptial agreement, right? You're entering into this partnership, and you want to think about down the road, if something happens, if one of us dies, if we decide to break up, I no longer want to be part of this corporation, what is in place. And that's what your buy sell agreement is doing. It's setting up the provisions to go, if we decide to, one of us or more than one of us moves on from this, there's a partnership breakup, there's that death, or there's that, maybe this is actually, it leads into this, mistake number one. What happens if I want to sell my ownership in this corporation, which is kind of like my partnership breakup? It's like, hey, there's no hard feelings here, Kyle, between you and me. But what happens if I get in a tough spot where I want to sell my share to, say, reap some of those benefits, and I'm out? Like, what does that look like? That's what the buy sell agreement is. It's a legal document that outlines what happens if we are, moving on, or one shareholder or more than one shareholder decides to move on. So let's jump right into that mistake number one. Many buy sell agreements are not addressing the sale of the company, Kyle.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's chat a little bit more about that. Now, there are nuances here as well, because even, if we talk about the sale of the company is less difficult when everyone's in agreement, right?
Sure.
Everybody's in agreement, and we're good to go. So for you and I, we are a 2-person team here. We basically have all the say. And if, let's say, a company was to come up and, we're speaking specifically to our online math consulting business and all of those things that we had built up over the past decade. Let's say you and I are going, you know what? We've done great work there. We love it, but we actually want to shift our thinking towards something else, right? We've got one of these lives. We've talked about it on previous episodes, and we want to just explore other options. You and I are both on the same page, and that's great. Like, we can decide in that moment what the value of that company is, right? We can go, do we think, like, would we be okay if company ABC over here wants to buy us out and buy all of our shares? So they're going to buy my shares, they're going to buy your shares, and they're going to essentially take over this company. They're going to eat this company up, and it's now theirs. That's something that we could decide together. However, that could also lead to a partnership breakup from the perspective that I want to sell more than you want to sell. And that can be the first challenge here that we dig into. So company ABC comes in and they go, hey, we're willing to buy your company for blank. And you go, I don't think it's enough. I really don't think it's enough. I think our company is worth more.
Yep.
And I'm going, John, come on now. Like the company, I think that's a great offer. I think we should take it. Now what happens?
Now, So it's like, okay, well, Kyle, if you think so, go for it, but you're going to buy me out. You know, like there's what is that provision? Like, is that a mandatory, provision that we need to write in? You know, what do we want to happen if a sale of our company comes down the pipe?
So here's one thing, and this will be important, not just for this specific scenario, but for other scenarios that we're going to address, is addressing the actual valuation of the company. So having a metric that will help us to evaluate or evaluate the value of our company at any given time. Now, there's different ways you can do this. You can do this each year, let's say, that you commit that every single year we're going to update manually, like we're going to come to terms on a value of our company, and we're going to go, hey, the company is this. From there, you could then say, if anyone approaches us with an offer to purchase for blank, we take it. And if it's less than blank, we don't take it. Like you could do that, right? You and I haven't done that, to that level of specificity, but you could do that if that's what you need to do. On the other hand, you might want to decide to use some sort of calculation. And this calculation could be really helpful, especially for some of the other reasons why we might have a buy-sell agreement triggered. And we'll talk about those in a minute. But this lack of having a valuation method in place can often lead to challenges. Because again, if we don't actually state this, if we don't come together once a year, or we don't have a calculation, a formula that actually tells us how much our company is worth to each other, when the opportunity or when we are forced into some sort of sale, you may have differing thoughts because we've never talked about them. So for example, I might think that our company is worth $5 million. And you might in your head think, no, like our company, like think of all the growth we have, like all of these metrics suggest that we're going to hit 10 million before, blah, blah, blah. So I think it's worth 10 million today.
Right.
And that's a big level of, a big gap between our thinking. So what we could do is we could actually make a formula. Like we could come up with a formula. We could look for formulas online. Some people use top line revenue. I think that's a little risky, right? Because top line revenue is like how much money's coming in, but like how much money's going out the back door, right? So you could do that. John, what is what has been sort of a good formula that we see a lot of solid buy-sell agreements sort of leaning on if you want to go to a formula that will value your company for you so that there's really no debate?
So I think what you'd want to do in that case, so that, because if you wait, right, like this is the downside, right? If you wait to, figure out the value of your company, in the moment, it's like you said, there's going to be disagreements. It's going to be like, wait a minute, but I'm going to value it high, or do I value it low? Like that's the other thing to think about too, Kyle, before we talk about the formula. It's like, okay, if I want to stay with the company, I want the value of the company to actually be calculated or valued lower than, say, earnings or revenue, or because I know things are going out the back door, but I want to pay less if I have to buy someone out. Like right. And if I'm on the way out, I want my company to be valued high. So this is why it's important to have this written in your buy-sell agreement, is to figure out how are we valuing our company. And, if you want to go to the formula route, if you want to go to say like every year, one way you could do it is that every year, every 2 years, you could all sit down and go, how do we value the company? Can we come up with a value of the company? If you come up with the value of the company, then you write it in your buy-sell agreement, but then you're in the process of updating your buy-sell agreement every single year or every 2 years, right? You're calling a lawyer, you're getting it done, it's all good in place, unless you go to the formula method, which is thinking about, a multiple of a particular metric that you can pull from your financial statements every year, so that if you don't have to continually update the buy sell agreement. The buy sell agreement has the formula. It says, hey, go and look at our last financial statements, or an average of our last 2 financial statements, and go, it's going to be 2 times EBITDA, or it's going to be 3 times or 5 times. Like, you have to decide that still, together when you go to write your buy sell agreement. In EDA is earnings before the interest that you owe, the taxes you owe, the depreciation on your assets, and also the amortization. And so you want to think about, like, what is that? You can calculate that number. Like, that's a set number that your financial statements are going to dictate to you. So that's why it's like, it's really nice to go, well, if I don't have to go do the updates, it's just, that's what we calculate it to be. And if you say we're worth 2 times that, then every year you're like, well, we grew, so now we're worth 2 times the new number. And every year, you check and you're like, hey, we're happy with always 2 times, EBITDA. So that can be something that you stick with. But that would be, say, our recommendation, to go, like, this is the way you might want to value your company, and have it written right into your buy sell agreement, so that exactly if someone's like has a death, how much is the company worth, so that we can give them their shares or buy their shares out.
I think that's one I'm happy you mentioned about death, because I think that's one of the ones that is, sure, maybe your partnership is strong and you don't anticipate that you ever will have a partnership break off, or that one partner decides they just want to pursue something else in life. I mean, I still think that's possible. We don't know who we're going to be in 10 years, right? So again, it doesn't have to be on bad terms. So I think it's still important. But what about the untimely death of one of the shareholders, right? So if there's an untimely death, you don't want, I know for me personally, like, I would not want to be sitting at a table with, your wife, to have a discussion about what we think the company is worth. Like, in her mind, she's going, I just lost my spouse. My spouse used to commit almost every waking moment of his life, pouring his soul into this company. And now we're going to talk about what that's worth. Right. Like, I'm guessing
That's tough.
that's going to be hard, right? That's a hard conversation. But on the other end, it's like, I can't pay this amount of money because I just don't have the opportunity to, or whatever it is. And I want to keep the company going. Now I got to hire somebody. I have to not only find someone that can replace the work that you do in the company, which is very different than the work that I do. And I have to, like, not only find them, but then I'm going to have to pay them something, right? Like, I'm going to have to either pay them a salary, or I'm going to have to give them shares, right? Which maybe are part of the shares that, I'm hoping to bring back to the company, so we can keep this thing going on. And that's without even worrying about mourning and, all the other emotions that you're going to feel. So by having a formula, it definitely helps so that everybody's clear. And even, spouses and other partners should probably in on that conversation too, just so it's not like a surprise, right? In terms of what's going to happen. It's like, hey, it'll be cut and dry. And the one benefit there is that you don't know what side you're going to be on. So you tend to pick something that's going to be more reasonable regardless of the side you're on. So what I mean by that is, I'm not going to go, well, hey, listen, if I die, I want the multiple to be 10 times EBITDA, right? I want it to be this massive number so that my family benefits significantly, because it could actually be on the other side, where then it's like, wait a second, now I'm also having to do that on the other end for the other family. So it's really about coming together and going, what's reasonable? And then I think most importantly, especially from the death side, on the partnership side, deciding how you'll buy out the other partner, especially if one of the partners, if your buy sell agreement allows a partner to get out, like, your buy sell agreement could state that at any time, 12 months in advance, a partner could elect to sell their shares back to the company, right? I don't recommend that, to be honest, because again, it's like, where's the company going to get the money from? However, when there's an untimely death, that gets hard, because the family, either one of two things happens. If we don't have a buy-sell agreement in place and I were to pass, my shares my shares in my company, which are held by a holding corp, but we're not going to get into the muddiness of that. But my shares are going to get passed to my estate. And if there's no buy-sell agreement forcing the sale back to either the company or to one of the other or all of the other shareholders, if we don't have that in place, my estate now becomes a partner. And I don't know about you, you didn't sign up to be in partnership, to be in bed with, I mean, we've never really been in bed together, but you know what we're talking about here. You've never really signed up for that estate to be a
Like
partner in your business, right? So we need to make sure that this is clear. And then how are we actually going to fund it?
Right. Yeah. Like you're right. Like if I pass, you didn't sign up to be in business, with my family, it might be my kids or my wife, whoever survives
As much as I
me.
love them.
Exactly. But it's like, well, do they have any like the fact that it's not like we're just shareholders of a corporation where we don't have any controlling interest, right? It's not like, hey, I just own shares of GM, and if I
Publicly
die,
traded company.
yeah, if I die and they pass to my estate, whoop-de-doo. Like they just keep rolling. Like GM doesn't care, but I mean, like we care because, like you said, like we are operators and not only just shareholders of the company. So we get votes in how the company runs. We get says. Like all of a sudden, you didn't sign up for that. So it's like, how do we fund and force? Like we write in that we're going to force that sale back to the corporation. And that's the other thing. It's like, you have to decide too, like what format do you want? Does the corporation buy the shares from the estate? Or do so the corporation is buying back ownership, which automatically, distributes the equity to the existing partners? Or do you set up a format that says, there's a cross purchase where you have to decide, who gets first choice or rights to buy shares? And you could potentially have, if you had a third partner, if we had a third partner and you and the other partner go, you know what, like I'm going to buy 75% of John's shares and you can buy 25% of John's shares. Are you okay with that? Like all of a sudden there's a negotiation and then all of a sudden you have way more controlling interest than equal shares. Like that has to be negotiated. So it's like, you have to decide what that looks like, let alone like how to fund it. Like that's related to that. So it's like, well, if we go, the corporation buys the shares out. So like an entity purchases, the entity purchased the shares back to the estate so that, we're buying back and automatically distributes that equity to the existing shareholders. Where are you going to get that money? Right. Like you may be operating with high, like a high profit and profit margin, so that hey, it's a no-brainer, but maybe this year it doesn't work out like that. Or maybe next year it's like we're running at a deficit, but we want to still make the business rolling and we can't buy them out. So if we can't buy them out, what happens? Like now, now we're in a pickle. So Kyle, I know that this was your brain baby to like figure out how, like, I think what most people do is they buy life insurance, but I know that you were thinking about like, how do we set that up right to make sure that it does the right thing,
Yeah, absolutely. And, so that is one thing. So not only, if we go all the way to the back of the, the front of the episode. So not only are there a lot of business owners that have shares in a privately held corporation, so they own shares in their corporation, maybe their spouse does as well. This might not be as big of an issue if, let's say, a spouse were to pass, right? Because then you could have it written in that, hey, it just, without any sort of transfer of money or wealth, the spouse takes the other shares and everything's good. But as soon as you get outside of that world, you now have to start thinking about, like you said, this funding problem. And that's where life insurance is definitely the easiest way to do that. And I would say the easiest way to do it quickly would be term life insurance. Now, some people who are like, wait a second, Kyle has only talked about on any episode, he's only talked about whole life insurance, participating whole life insurance, high cash value, all of those things. That tool is an amazing tool, but it's not necessarily the tool that is going to help us solve this particular problem. This particular problem can be solved with term life insurance. Now, the difference between the two is term life insurance is kind of like you're renting an insurance policy. Participating whole life insurance is like you're buying it, right? So think about it as renting your home. You don't have any equity in your home. You can't go and get a HELOC on your rental. You are renting the home. And as soon as you stop paying rent, you got to leave. You don't have that roof over your head. Whereas like participating whole life is like buying a home. You are investing in this home. You are actually building an asset. You are benefiting from compound interest, and therefore you can borrow against it. So for this particular scenario, we're going to talk about term life insurance. Typically, different companies have different things. So for example, RBC, for example, I believe has like, you can set the term to any number, like 11 years, if you want. Other companies kind of stick to like 10 years, 20 years. Some even have like, T100, like it's like you can have term for the rest of time, but the amount will change over time. Kind of like picture if you were in a rental, and then every year the landlord tenant board allows you to increase the rent by a certain percentage. So there's all kinds of different ways, but typically like a term 10 or a term 20 will work. And you can, of course, cancel any time. Like you're saying term 10, what they're doing is guaranteeing you for 10 years that they will cover you for up to a certain amount of money for 10 whole years, as long as you pay monthly or annually, whichever you prefer, a certain amount. So that for 10 years, they're guaranteeing the coverage, regardless of your health situation, based on what your health is today. They don't care if it changes over time. They're not going to charge you anymore. But beyond 10 years, you can continue, kind of like a 1-year lease on your home. You can continue that lease, but over time, the rate might continue to increase after that point, right? So that is one way that you can do it. You and I, John, in this particular corporation, Matt and I also, with our real estate corporation, we have, insurance, term insurance over there. We both have that set up. But in our corporation, you and I have, I think it's around 2 million in term insurance in order to cover one of our deaths. So if one of us die, 2 million will go to the company. And from there, we now have the funds to buy out the other family. Okay. So that we could buy back the shares to the company. That's the simplest way to deal with the death of a shareholder, right? If you want to make that easy, because then it's like, wait a second, we got a formula. So we know, and your formula is going to depend on your industry. So if you're software as a service is going to have a much higher, a much higher multiplier, because it doesn't require as many people, right? So it's very scalable. That's going to have a higher multiple than, say, a service business. Like you and I are mostly in a service business, so that multiple is much lower. You get to decide that with your partner, but what you want to make sure is that you have at least enough insurance to cover that. It's also not a bad idea to go, are we anticipating to grow beyond a certain valuation? And you might want to continue tacking it on. Now, one thing with our insurance policies that we tend to do is we also tend to make these policies convertible. And John, if we know what we want to convert it from, we're renting insurance over here to take care of the buy sell. Over time, we might choose that if we have enough retained earnings in our company to buy the house and convert it over to a whole life policy, which will allow us to put our money into the policy, allow it to grow and compound. We can borrow against it to buy other assets, which is the main tool and the main reason we do this. But then there's also this other magic benefit that we get inside our corporation. If we go back to either, it doesn't matter if it's term or whole life insurance in general, if one of us passes and that money goes, I said 2 million. So that 2 million goes to the company. It's $2 million with no tax implication. And we get to then use that money to buy back those shares without any tax implication. So there's a magic benefit there. And then over time, if we slowly convert our term to whole life insurance, it's like now we get this big, big, big asset, and it becomes essentially a wealth or legacy plan for our estates. If we make it, 10, 20 years without dying, then we could be building this other nest egg over here. Now that's don't worry about this part yet. Just make sure your term insurance is convertible. And of course, I have my favorite companies to have the convertible insurance that we want to be converting into. So imagine if you were, renting a car over here, and it's like you can convert it into a car you owned, but the car was like a Pinto, or it was a Corvette convertible, right? It's like we want to make sure that what we design over here is a nice gateway, that it maximizes your opportunity to protect in the short term, which is what we're after here, but then also opens the door to that convertible Corvette instead of the convertible Pinto, right? Because that can happen if you go with certain companies that don't have the products that are going to help you achieve the longer term goal as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point for sure. And I think, we tried to outline here, I think that's a great benefit of the service that, that we have been coaching, our clients on, and helping them kind of wrap their minds around, like, how are they using the buy sell agreements? Is it, are we fixing these gaps that we've outlined here in this episode so that they're filled in? And then also going like, hey, do we have the tools available, or do you have the tools available to achieve the things that you want to see happen in the buy sell agreement? We've been meeting with our clients on a regular basis. That's why we're like, we got to address this, because it's really important aspect of your corporation to set it up so that it's tax optimized, but also so that you're optimized in case one of these situations, comes out. So if you are looking to, learn more about, exploring, how to set this up, but also like how to structure, your financial side of things. Like, let's say you want to get, that insurance, life insurance slid into the right spot to cover some of these gaps. Then you could head on over to investedteacher.com/discovery. We'd be glad to hop on a call and talk you through that, or help you kind of navigate around that.
And, just to mention again and reiterate, it's like I've never had someone reach out to me specifically asking for assistance with buy sell agreements. It's like this usually comes out when they want to do something much bigger, much more elaborate. For example, they're paying a lot in taxes on the personal side. We've got people that own corporations, and they're like, well, I thought I had to take a dividend because of this, or I thought I had to take a salary because of that. And, oftentimes people are being, I don't want to say misled, but they're not being well informed enough to know the implications of why doing what they're doing is causing, say, a certain amount of tax implications. So we get on these calls, but we often get stuck at places like this because it's so much more important to make sure that these are in place, and it's easy enough. And I just want to reiterate, like, we don't do the buy sell agreement for you. Like, we just help ask you the questions that you want to go and talk to your lawyer about. Okay. Because your lawyer doesn't know enough about your business like you do. Right. And that's really the difference here. It's not that you go in and you tell your lawyer, why didn't you do this in the first place? It's like, well, if they don't know exactly what you're after, they're not exactly sure in all cases in what to do. So once again, this is not intended to be something where it makes you question your team or anything like that, but it's about being specific, because until we're specific and we know exactly what we want, we're not necessarily going to get that clear, focused approach that we're after. So hopefully you found this episode helpful. Like John said, more than happy to hop on a call with you to discuss buy-sell agreements. From there, I'm going to guess that there's probably some other tidbits that you'll learn along the way as well. That's our goal, is to make sure you get at least one big takeaway from every episode, but also every phone call we get on that's very specific to your situation. So reach out to us over at investedteacher.com/discovery. and you can grab a spot so we can have a chat, learn more about you, your company, your businesses, whatever it is that you might be doing. And we'll do our best to try to guide you to the next best step.
Folks, we want to thank you for listening to this episode of the Invested Teacher podcast. If you have not yet subscribed, hit that subscribe button on wherever you're listening. Wherever you're listening. Is that Spotify? Is that Apple Podcast? I've personally been listening on Spotify for the last couple of years, and I don't know, Kyle. I'm not. I don't even know what the other platform was like anymore. I'm all on Spotify. Don't forget, also, we're on all social media at Invested Teacher, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all those things. So make sure you follow us and learn more.
Links, resources, transcripts, and all kinds of other goodies can be found over on the website at investedteacher.com/episode 51. That is investedteacher.com/episode 51.
All right, Invested students, class dismissed. Just as a reminder, the content you heard here today is for informational purposes only. You should not construe any such information or other material as legal, tax, investment, financial, or other advice.
Matt Bigley is a licensed realtor in the province of Ontario with Deerbrook Realty. John is a mortgage agent with Bricks Mortgage, license number M23006803. And Kyle Pierce is a licensed life and accident and sickness insurance agent and wealth architect with the Pan Corp team. And that team includes all those from Corporate Advisors and the Pan Financial team.